Hello YouTube, today we're doing part 2 of the program review for Joël. And last week I really focused on the exercise selection and I tried to create supersets and I spoke about my first direct impressions. But today we're going to be able to dive a little bit deeper. The reason for that is because Joël has a week A and week B in a sense, so he has a light week and a heavy week. And so you have certain days that are going to be lower in intensity artificially because he's going to decide to go lower. And that has created the template that we discussed last week with the first 4 days. And the next 4 days we're going to discuss are pretty much the same, but there are certain rep ranges that change and certain movements that are taking a much higher focus on intensity. And so for the week 1, we saw that the overhead press and the deadlift were the heavy movements. And for week 2, the squat and the bench are going to be the heavy movements, and the deadlift and the overhead press are light. So when I look at the rep range, because if you're going to have modifications of intensities, you also have to have modifications in rep ranges because they work together. So for example, if you're going to open your day with only one set at a relatively low intensity, it also means that most likely the back of sets or the sets that follow are going to have to make up for a lack of tonnage. This is called tonnage stability. It has to be maintained. And by definition, it also means that if you go a bit heavier on the strength work that opened the workout, you're going to have back of sets that are going to be lighter. So when I look at what he's done here, on his light overhead press day, he's done that properly, meaning that the weighted pull-ups went up in volume. Not necessarily in intensity, but in volume. You will see that with intensity, you can really stay within the same range and realm for a lot of exercises. What will change is how many reps do you do within that intensity. And for him, he went from a 4 sets of 4 to 6 to a 4 sets of 8 to 10 on the weighted pull-up. So that's double the tonnage. That's double the tonnage on the lower ratio, which is 4, and that's a little bit less than double on the higher, because the higher for him would be 6 reps on one day and 10 on the other. So it doesn't match as much, but it's a good thing. That being said, you also have to keep in mind that that extra volume that now exists doesn't really correlate with a movement that was pre-fatiguing the movement. I explain. On both these days, he starts with overhead press. Regardless of the intensity that you apply to overhead press, it's going to have almost no impact on your pull-up strength. And this is also the reason why I say that the fact that he stays most likely within an intensity that is going to push him to failure on the weighted pull-up is smart. But Joël, if you're not doing that, you should. What I mean by that is, if you have a weight that you use for the weighted pull-up for 6 reps, it shouldn't be the same weight if you're going to do 10 reps. I think that's a given because one will bring you to failure and the other one doesn't. So I am suspecting that you're using more weight when you do your 4 to 6 than when you do the 8 to 10. If you're not, you should. Because if you're not doing that, I think you're hurting yourself. Because without realizing it, and that's the big issue with light and heavy days, you are applying a heavy and light scheme to every single exercise. And from what I see in your template, it's not set up in that way. It's not set up to actually have what I would call an echoing or reverberating effect on the rest of the day. Just the opening, just the strength work, the first movement is supposed to be light or heavy. And you have smartly rearranged the rest of the day around it to match the lack of volume, but keep in mind that you also have to match the intensity. It has to be similar. So for the rest of the rep range, for his close grip bench, he does 3 sets of 8 to 10. So that's interesting again, because you've modified the set range this time. Instead of 4 sets of 4 to 6, you're doing 3 sets of 8 to 10. I think, yes. And the reason why it's interesting is because 3 sets of 8 to 10 would be more prone to making you progress, because the amount of times you have to reproduce the intensity and the muscular endurance is shrunk on only 3 sets. So it's easier to perform. That's a good thing, nothing to say about that. Just taking a broad look at it to make sure that I don't miss something major. But I don't see any modifications of what you've done in terms of exercise selection, so I would tell you to just follow what I told you to do in the first episode. I do, however, see that on the day 2, where you do a heavy back squat, you do a full set of 4 to 6 Romanian deadlift, which is high intensity for the Romanian deadlift, compared to the 4 sets of 10 that you used to do, which is, most people would think it's only 4 reps, so it's not that much. It's 4 reps minus the evolving rep range, meaning that in reality you're doing 4 sets of 10 with the first 3 sets being sandbag, so they're artificially lower in intensity. So in reality, on your heavy back squat day, you are, if you're using the same intensity rate, moving a lot more with the Romanian deadlift. And that can also be an issue because, as you see, what you've done here is you've lowered the amount of reps of the Romanian deadlift to be able to lower the volume because you're going to move more weight on the heavy back squat, and therefore you're going to end up with I always do that when I look at the way you write your rep range, sorry. So again, I didn't look at the rep range properly. The Romanian deadlift actually doesn't change, but the back squat does. So for your heavy back squat, you do a 4 sets of 4 to 6. And if I'm not mistaken, let me just check that real quick. But 4 sets of 4, 4, 10, 3 sets of 3. Okay, I see you applying static rep ranges for certain movements and evolving rep ranges for certain movements. And I was wondering if you were trying to match these with the light and heavy parameters. I don't think that's the case because it does look a bit random, because you do apply a static rep range for your light squat, you do an evolving rep range for the light bench. So explain to me why you're doing that, but keep in mind one thing. Every single time I see a static rep range in your training, you could replace it because you already have shown that you have the ability to replace it. And if you're telling me that you do that because you want a static amount of tonnage, then that's fine. But I would advise you, if that's the case, to still do your heavy work in evolving rep range and then slap some back off sets that might be in a 5x5, 3x3, etc. I explained that in the previous installment. Overall, you need to understand that my overarching issue is that you're sandbagging. And a lot of the time, when I see you sandbagging, you're not even sandbagging to create space for tonnage to exist somewhere else, which is a big issue. And to go back to the relationship between the heavy back squat and the Romanian deadlift, you are going to do Romanian deadlifts with the same amount of reps, the same amount of sets, even though you are going to move a lot more weight on the back squat. That might be an issue. You might want to cut down the Romanian deadlift by 1 set. You might want to allow yourself to manipulate the set range for the heavy movement. Again, because as I see you doing here is, if we're looking at intensity as a spectrum, if this is balanced, you tend to be a little bit too extreme when you do your heavy days, and you tend to be a little bit too lenient when you do your light days. So in both cases, you are going to exist outside of intensity windows that might be sustainable. And to relate that to another problem that I have with that type of programming, when I see people who program a heavy and light day, or I see people who program a volume day and an intensity day, the issue with that is they tend to go way overboard on the volume day, meaning that they are going to do way too many reps in irrelevant intensity windows. And for the intensity day, it's the opposite. They go way too high intensity. They tend to repeat sets that demand a lot of muscular endurance too many times, and they are going to sabotage progression. And it's not a balanced approach. So I do remember that you sent a message on that video. So again, I'm not bending your arm or twisting your arm to do that. I just want you to keep those things in mind, because if one day you end up meeting a roadblock with your training, understand that you have an easy way out. It's just get rid of the light and heavy day and just do evolving rep ranges, because the evolving rep ranges do that in reality. They are going to help you manipulate the volume and intensity in a way that is going to be much less arbitrary and drastic than just doing a light day. And at the end of the day, you can still make it so that you only do 1 set of heavy work, but at least you got that 1 set of heavy work done. You didn't just do 4 sets of sandbagging reps. And the reason I say that to you and to everyone in general is, with programs, you want flexibility. And if you can find portions of the programs or principles or parameters that you can get rid of to open portions of freedom, you should. And I think that in your case, by getting rid of the light and heavy day, you're going to end up with a solid 4-day program, because the programs for week A and week B are mirrored. And as I told you in the first installment, there's nothing wrong with the program, it's a good program. But what you could do is, instead of having that heavy and light week, the second week should be a week that replicates the days with variations that are going to implement new movements, variations, maybe a rotation of the muscles being hit, maybe a rotation of the rep range, maybe even a replacement of certain main movements, depending on what you like. If you want an example of that put in practice, you look in the program review, the 3 programs. I think it was the Chico inspired one where I have a week A and week B that have the same muscles being worked, but with different movements. And that you will find when you progress can be a lifesaver because it's going to save you from routine, it's going to still feel fresh. I personally find that having 8 days it's already a lot of renewal. It feels brand new, it feels fresh, especially if you have an implementation of rotations within the days. That is a topic that I want to talk about for gentlemen splits, and I will get into details, but you don't have to do it right now. Just the fact that you modify the days enough that they feel different might be a good replacement for that light and heavy weak parameter. So for the heavy bench press day, same logic as with the overhead press. You are going to do that aerobic rep range. You're going to get a lot more tonnage. You're going to move more weight. And the way you modified the back offset of the incline dumbbell press makes sense too, because you're cutting off 4 reps. So you're going from 10 to 12 to 6 to 8. So that's good. That's pretty much what I advise. And again, understand that if you apply what I tell you to do, which is just do revolving rep ranges, you will still be able to do that for back offsets, because you're going to have to match the amount of tonnage that the back offsets bring with the amount of sets and reps done in the evolving rep range. But that is explained in the playlists. So nothing to say about that. I do have to say, however, that I see that for your light deadlift day, you do a light deadlift day, trap bar deadlift. So it's a different style. That's what I say. This is a variation. And here, I don't have anything against that. Actually, I like it. Because with the deadlift, you will find that it's one of the lifts that requires the least frequency, and also, in my opinion, is the least susceptible to regressing when you don't do it often. Meaning that if you don't deadlift conventional for 10 days, you won't forget how it feels. Something like the bench has a much faster rate of technical regression, but not the deadlift. So it's cool you're doing trap bar deadlift. That being said, I question the interest of doing a light day with a trap bar. It's already a non-invasive deadlift variation. You can go heavy with it. It's safer than a conventional deadlift. And again, same logic for the rest of your deadlift day. I think that you could pack it up with more stuff if you wanted. I am minimalistic when it comes to the deadlifts and for the lower days as well, but also understand that minimalism, just like with anything in programming, is a tool to free up space to do more stuff. It's not just, oh, I can get away with 40 minutes. It's, I can get away with 40 minutes and therefore I have an extra hour to train other muscles. So again, this is where the movements can go. So that's pretty much that. In terms of frequency and recovery, you do 4 days in a row. And I understand also that the reason why you might have your heavy and light days, because when you have done an heavy overhead press day on day 1, and 2 days later you do another press workout, you don't want to be tired, and I get that. You might, in this case, benefit from having a rest day every 2 days. If you really can't handle having 3 push days in a row like this. Because as I see here, you already do 4 days rest day, 4 days. So it's a total of 10 days trained and 8 days actually training. And with my method, it would double that. So I understand if it's something that you're resistant to. When it comes to recovery, it's something that is always personal, so I can't force you to do it a way or the other. Understand, however, that it might become at some point beneficial for you to do so. Because even though today with your technique, you are training 6 days a week, which is excellent, it's already high, there's sometimes a benefit to shrinking down the amount of days you're doing to be able to pack more volume in them, so that when the time comes for you to re-extend and reopen the range of the days you train, now you're going to see that your tonnage is going to be much higher because you were able to do much more on a certain day. And because muscular endurance is so important for bodybuilders, at some point, I would advise people to not let frequency dictate their ability to recover too much. Meaning that there's only 7 days in a week. Okay, we as humans, we arbitrarily decided that there's 7 days in a week. What do you do when you've met 7 days and you plateau? You're going to have to start doing more volume and have lengthier sessions. But you're going to go from 7 days to now having to slap things on 7 days. That might be a culture shock in a sense. It would be much more beneficial if you shrunk down to maybe 5 days or 4 days, slowly increase the volume, even if you have to sandbag a little bit, because as you'll see, the addition of a 6th day, for example, if you go from 5 to 6, again, you reverse back, would just take some tonnage off from these days. And I find that in terms of adaptation for the body, it is much easier. So I'm going to leave you with that. It's going to be that for this video. As you've seen, I've mentioned a lot of topics that I want to discuss on this channel, a lot of topics that I've discussed on this channel. So I always encourage people to check the playlist, look for what I've discussed in the past and presented, and to be patient because, of course, there's a lot of things that I want to talk about, but it's at the rate and the pace of 10 videos a week. So it's slowly coming in, but we're building up the library and eventually we will be speaking the same language in a sense. But I hope what I discussed makes sense. Again, if you have any questions, Joel, anything that you want me to dive deeper into, let me know, but that's going to be that. And for the people who watched this video, this is actually a solid program, so if you want to jump on it, go ahead, you have my benediction. Have a good day.